This conference will now be recorded.
All right. Hi. Thanks for joining, everybody. I'm really pleased to introduce Neal Stimler today, who's the Senior Advisor and Business Development Specialist at the Balboa Park Online Collaborative. He'll be presenting today, as you can see on the screen, about different approaches to developing strategies for the GLAM sector. And this is a talk that Douglas and Neal and I have been talking about for a while. So much prior to our current sort of pandemic and situation, but it's really a great time for museums to focus on their strategy development and think big picture. So sort of a note that Douglas and I are looking to plan separate conversations around coronavirus and how museums are responding. This is helpful in light of this situation, but it's not only about the current pandemic. And before I hand it over to Neal, just a heads up, we will be sharing this video out on Basecamp and also the NCN YouTube channel. And we'll also share a version of this deck. There's lots of really great information on it. So now I'll hand it over to Neal, who will run through the presentation and give some time for questions at the end.
Thank you, Trish. I really appreciate you and Douglas welcoming me to join this conversation and forum. And so again, here we are today, we're talking about strategy for museums and GLAMs and libraries and archives and the whole group of things. And these are just my links. If you're interested in getting in touch with me and learning more about my work, you can find me on my website, Twitter, and LinkedIn on a daily basis, and also the website for the Balboa Park Online Collaborative, which is based in San Diego, California, but I am speaking to you today from New York City, where I live. So I have some friendly faces and colleagues I can see here that have joined us today. So thank you to all of my colleagues who have joined in this conversation today. Really glad to see you and appreciate your time today in the sea of many webinars and busy things going on. And just a little bit about me, if you don't know my background and where I'm from. So I spent over a decade at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. I'm known for my work in the open access space, having supported the Met, the Cleveland Museum of Art, and the Smithsonian in that work. And at BPOC, I provide a range of services to support different clients across customer experience, education, operations, and partnerships. And this is the area of work that BPOC provides support in. And if you don't know BPOC, it's a 501c3 nonprofit service, consultancy service based in Balboa Park in San Diego, California. Our wonderful CTO and fearless leader is Nick Honeysett, who many of you also know and appreciate from his time at the Getty, his work at the American Alliance of Museums on their board, and also in consulting services with Balboa Park. So I want to give a special thanks to Nick and the team at BPOC. And today, this is just an overview of what we're going to be talking about, looking at GLAM strategy from a different perspective. And as Tricia said, this was planned in advance of our current situation. And so the recommendations I'm going to present today really are about thinking about what we do next. And this would be in areas of business and thinking about earn revenue capacity, what's mission critical, and also thinking about the issues in the environment. So think about this as a way to help you plan for the future and plan for a sustainable future. It's a mission. If you don't have a strategy, your organization is going to, especially executive teams, process or a document that from typical behaviors to strategy, which are unfortunately reactive, not proactive. They tend to prioritize tradition over innovation. They typically seek to preserve the status quo. It seems like my screen is having some issues. Audio breaking up. Okay, I'm hearing that. Okay, everyone. How is the audio now? Is the audio any better?
I think it's caught up. Yeah. I think
okay.
We're good now. Thanks.
Okay, great. Sure. Thanks for letting me know. So we tend to be reactive, not proactive. We tend to have a cut mindset rather than an investment mindset, and we're anecdotal and rather than data informed. These are things I've experienced in advising different clients and working in different institutions, the typical behavior around strategy. This is the first grouping of things. The second also has some more difficult challenges as well. So especially institutions, they'll hire a consulting firm or they'll bring in a special advisor and they bring in expert advice from outside and then they ignore that advice, which is a strange thing to do. Museums and strategy are non-committal sometimes. They'll start in one direction and then go completely in the other. They will set very, very aggressive agendas and ambitions that they know they don't actually have the resources to deliver. A lot of times institutions will blame external factors rather than owning the responsibility for why their strategy didn't work. Well, this year we had a shortfall, or there was a problem with this and that, rather than saying, actually, this is a systemic issue we need to be looking at much more closely. And then in the relationship to technology, although we're looking at strategy in a much broader lens today, the issue is that technology is treated as a project. So I have to fix this system or that system, or I have to fix this application or that application, rather than seeing it as an ecosystem, a holistic process. So my recommendations for what GLAM strategy should be are disciplined, determined, and diligent. So these are 3 words I think that can help you keep you focused. And let's start off with disciplined. So establishing a process and then reasonably following it through. I'm sure many of you have been in projects, project teams, where you have a meeting, you decide on a course of action, and then either 30 minutes later via email or the next time you had that scheduled meeting, the entire process you just agreed on has been thrown out the window and you're starting all over again. Now, there could be a good reason for that in certain circumstances, but oftentimes it's just us being distracted. And that goes to determined. So being resolved to carry out that agreed upon course of action and stem distractions and disruptions, really key for developing a strategy. And then being diligent, following through on it, being steadfast and pragmatic to your organization's goals. And I want to talk to you first to set up the framework today about the dynamic sustainability framework. And this comes from a medical paper, actually, you see cited on the slide, from Chambers and Glasgow and Stange. And this was a paper actually about medical research. But what I found most interesting about it was these key themes of being adaptive, contextually sensitive, and focusing on continuous quality improvement. And so I've used those theme frames to apply them to the GLAM sector. So in our thinking about the GLAM sector, we're going to talk about, see, it seems the slides are a bit delayed. Let's see. Trisha, which are you seeing, slide 11 or slide 10?
I'm seeing the dynamic sustainability framework slide, so 10.
Okay, there seems to be a lag between.
A slight lag.
Yeah.
I wonder, I mean, we're all working from home.
Yep.
I'm sure
Well, thanks everyone
bandwidth
for your
is an
patience.
issue. Yeah, thank you all.
Okay. So I'll keep talking, but hopefully the slides will catch up. If not, you'll have access to them afterwards. So the next slide that you'll see, hopefully when it catches up, is the dynamic sustainability platform, which is what I'm calling the GLAM solution for that. So in that one, we're going to focus on being adaptive, which is to modify our techniques and tools from other sectors, especially commercial, to understand that a lot of times museums and libraries and archives, they benchmark themselves against their peers. And your peers may actually not have the right answer or the best practice. There we go. And now it's turned over, so hopefully you can all see that now. So don't look to things outside of yourselves. Being contextually sensitive. You have a mission, you have a collection, you have a program, these are your core, but don't forget that you're part of a community, both locally and internationally. So that's why I've used the word local here, so both global and local. And many people that are coming to your institution, they travel around the world, they have family and friends around the world in different places or different states or different localities. Think about all of those different contexts when you're designing what you do. And in terms of institutional strategy, look outside your own institutional culture and its myopia. We tend to get stuck in our own ways of working and not think about the context. And then our theme for continuous quality improvement is to measure our quality first by customer engagement. One of the things that we see museums, I think, do in libraries and archives time and time again is the leadership and the staff are trying to define the goals and the success, and not the customers, not the patrons, not the public. So we need to flip that on its head and reorient our thinking on that. Great. So next I want to show you, we've talked about those three big themes, and now I want to talk about another important group of things that are going to link back to those three themes. And that is that our missions in galleries, libraries, archives, and museums are really interdependent now on, in my view, three main things: the economy, engagement, and the environment. And those are things that are all interconnecting and circling around your mission. And so what we're going to do in the next few points of discussion is connect each one of these three main themes of interdependence back to the themes that I've just told you before. So we're going to start with the economy, which is first and foremost, in terms of how we can actually develop content that is adaptive, that is economically supportive for us. So again, first and foremost, beginning to design content as digital first, so that it can be redistributed, bought and sold on multiple channels. I think one of the great challenges here is that we have a tradition in libraries, museums, and archives of building things in certain ways and practices. I designed this way for the label. I produced this way for the printed brochure. I made content this way for the website. And really all of these things are interconnected. And if you design them as a digital first process, you'll have a greater ability to reshare them and make future economic use out of them as well. I'm still seeing institutions that haven't taken advantage of the basic implementation of transactional technologies from other industries. Contactless payments, mobile and web. At the New York City subway, which is one of the most difficult transactional experiences one can have, can do contactless payments. Your museum can too. And it's important to help and advance those things along. I'm also still seeing institutions that have one counter that takes cash and another one that takes credit cards. So all of these missed opportunities to streamline the way that money is transferred from your customers to you. So simplify that and prioritize those transactional technologies. Another problem I see oftentimes working with libraries and galleries and our museums is that all of the transactional experiences are in the lobby, or they're just in the entranceway of the institution. We need to spread that out. We tend not to have points of contact at other points in the journey of our customer experience on site in the museum. And the same is true of our digital presences with websites. So we may only have a donation page, one donation page, but that could be presented on multiple experiences on the web or our social media channels. So create more transaction points, both for the selling of your products, which could be a program or it could be merchandise, beyond the threshold of your institution, whether that's the digital threshold or the physical one. We see a lot of institutions in their retail experience is really struggling to move what I'm calling dead inventory, like gifts and books. And people's interest now has really shifted to limited time, sustainable merchandise, a lot of it being clothing or simple things that they can share, even digital products as well. So we want to think about how we can shrink the physical footprint of the retail space and really focus that towards things that are giving us value. And then some museums have experimented with this more than others, and maybe archives and special collections libraries as well, but partnering with aligned merchandisers and brands. So some examples could be things like Playmobil has done collaborations with the Rijksmuseum. The Rijksmuseum is a very well-known collaborator in that space of creating brand products. They're just one of other institutions. But if you can actually take your collections or your brand in partnership with other organizations, you can grow and scale that. And then in the economy, we also want to be contextually sensitive. So we wanted to think about how we can prioritize to earn revenue. And we're seeing right now in our current situation, the challenges of contributed fundraising and grants. And we need to be working more to convert through online sales and micro donations and loyalty and subscription services. These are the things that are powering the current and the new economy. And museums need to start investing in those more. I think another thing that's often overlooked is that we still have a huge problem in connecting to diverse audiences and constituencies with language and accessibility. And with technologies that are now baked into basic software or website design or browsers, we can be doing so much more in the way that we design content so that it can be used by those systems and platforms to grow our audiences by making our work accessible to people. So prioritizing accessibility, I think, is very important. And many of you will know our colleagues in the field, Sina Bahram and Corey Timpson, who would do a lot of great work in that space. If you haven't worked with them, I encourage you to get in contact with them to help you with that. Get to know your customers better through personalization and opt-in opportunities. I think there's so many museums and institutions still that are not taking full advantage of establishing that personal relationship with organizations and their customers and missing out on better ways of engagement. Also want to address, since we're in the economy section, food and beverage programs. So many museums have very boring cafes. If I can get a sandwich here in a city like New York, for example, where there's hundreds of sandwich shops, your sandwich is not going to convert my attention. I need it to be a great sandwich. I need it to be the most exciting sandwich I've ever had in my life. I want it to be interesting and connected to your collections in some way, or your exhibitions or your programs. Make it interesting, make it dynamic. And then furthermore, so many museums, when they close at 5 o'clock or they close at 6:30, the restaurant is closed. So they're not fully optimized to take advantage of the potential earned revenue that that restaurant could be making if they are participating in common services like DoorDash or Seamless or Grubhub. So extend the economic opportunity of those food and beverage programs. And as I mentioned earlier, if your cafe or food and beverage program is not interesting or unique and there's too much competition in the area, don't bother having one. There's so much choice. Make sure that if you're really going to invest in that, that it's a success for you. And now we're going to move into the continuous quality improvement section theme. And so many institutions are struggling still. They don't have any business intelligence and reporting capabilities yet. And so we want to institute those analytics practices right from the beginning as a way of tracking across the organization. There are still relatively few institutions that have either hired full-time positions or contracted work in analytics and data insights as roles at the executive level or managerial levels. So we need that higher level of understanding by having these folks on our teams. We want to set reasonable goals and target those with iterative achievement and build on consistent foundations and platforms. We want to build partnerships with allied organizations in our sectors, but also commercial and technology partners. So museums, especially in the United States, tend to work independently or in isolation. Maybe they sometimes have contact with peers in their city, but really they need to be beginning to open their arms more to people that are far be outside of their remits traditionally and engage them to grow and sustain themselves. And establish an elite team mentality. Sometimes we have people in our organizations that are still just showing up because they've been showing up for a long time. We need to kickstart our teams and have a really inspired process of people that are inspired in the economy to earn money to serve the mission. So the mission is the goal, but we need to have the revenue to be able to carry it out. And now we're going to jump into engagement, which was our second circle there in terms of the interdependence. As soon as the slide catches up. Let's see here. Well, I'll begin and hopefully the lag will come away. So thinking about engagement differently is very important, especially in this time. And my recommendation is to think about your institution first and foremost is it not being a building, right? Buildings have responsibilities, they have possibilities for engagement, but our entire frame of this industry, the GLAM sector, has been thinking about buildings. And we need to think differently. And there's so many lessons that we can draw from broadcast, internet, and social media businesses. A huge challenge for us going forward as a sector is thinking about public engagement as a goal was attendance. So many of our programs were driven on the notion of having high density volume in attendance. And in our current situation, that's not fully feasible, but also these were very shallow metrics. We didn't really know much about the people that attended these programs en masse. They came and we counted them with a clicker, or we counted them maybe with a survey, but we didn't actually offer much nuance and depth in our programming that we could measure. And our digital tools give us many more opportunities to have even deeper engagement, longer engagement, more sustained engagement than just thinking about how many people showed up in the numbers. So I think we have to think very hard about changing that. And then our customer experience is also changing as a result of this. So we're moving toward more of a model for our customers where we're prioritizing self-directed and on-demand experiences. So most of our institutions are used to certain production schedules that in many ways mirror the academic year or the calendar year. And so our production is driven by these 3 to 6 month cycles. But the way that we produce now, I think has to be rethought. And then if we're going to be offering, especially with digital first in mind, larger format activities like large group events online, we have to make sure we have the proper infrastructure and the pacing to make those a success. So just because technology enables us to very quickly have a webinar, for example, or have a hosted call, if you're trying to draw a large number of people, we want to make sure that we capture people's attention, that we give them enough advance warning, that we understand they may have other pressures during their day, really make sure we put the same emphasis behind that we would have on a physical program. And in physical programs too, the problem often is that we don't tell anybody we have the program. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to museum educators or public programmers who were surprised that people didn't come to their event and they didn't email them about it. They put up a flyer in the lobby. So we need to be thinking about how we actually communicate with people about our programs. As we move on to contextually sensitive, so our second theme related to our second interdependent issue. We want to have content that is designed to be rich in a templated process as much as possible. So many times with museum digital projects and websites, we will build a bespoke microsite. We will create a new interface for this. We will rebuild something that hasn't been updated in a while. As much as we can for the core content, having rich media content, a templated solution is a very strong way to go. Now, if that seems like, well, that's going to be very stale, the other thing we can learn to do is try different techniques of surprise. So many companies and brands today don't have a public launch campaign that is slowly revealed. A product just simply appears. This is a technique we can use as well. Other types of content we can introduce into the GLAM space include video commentary, review shows, games and challenges. So more than just the branded presented content, these are other ways of continuing the conversation that many people that are doing streaming services online or streaming programs have taken advantage of. Of course, I'll throw my plug in for open access, which enables your communities, your users, to recreate with your collections and your research and share it back with you in compelling ways. So ways to empower your users and customers to have them engage back with you using your collections as much as possible. And then, of course, we're seeing a huge rise in these dynamic new cultural contexts of esports and video games, which have massive numbers of users that overwhelm the number of people that attend cultural institutions. So tapping into more of that. And there's also companies that have produced video game experiences like Assassin's Creed, for example, which also has an educational version of the game, has teaching people ancient mythology from Greece and also showing cultures in Egypt and the streets of Paris. So these for-profit video game companies are actually doing more in some ways to attract general audiences to culture than traditional institutions can themselves at this point. And now for engagement, we'll talk about our continuous quality improvement. And so we want to commit to investing the money, the time, and the resources to have quality engagement and to measure it. So many times our programs go unmeasured. We declare success rather than having the evidence of success. And we want to develop those programs and initiatives from the outset where we have identified those metrics and how they're going to be measured in digital tools that are reporting, rather than having to try to compile things from miscellaneous emails, hand surveys. We want to think about metrics up front. And then when we talk about measuring engagement in a way that's consistent across intervals of the program, that's very important as well, because sometimes I think in our institutions, we tend to measure the big gala. We tend to measure the blockbuster exhibition opening or the spring or the fall show. And we don't think about measuring our engagement consistently across the entire program. And so it's important to keep that in mind. And for your customers, make participation easy. Give me something that I can click, a website survey, an email, a social media poll. I can't tell you how many, especially in New York City, especially performing arts organizations, that still send me giant printed glossy color brochures, which have no way for me as a customer to buy a ticket or to find out more information. So it's a huge waste of money, but not actually focusing on the conversion that's easy for the customer. But it's more of, again, that operation on tradition. And of course, be communicative with our customers. Tell them in your messaging how their responses have improved what you do for them. I think because we just assume as institutions sometimes that if we've made something better, people will acknowledge it, but we need to have more of that acknowledgement for our customers too. Excellent. Okay, we're moving on to the environment, our third quadrant in the interdependence. Now, climate change is something that is affecting all our cultural institutions now. It's affecting us in this moment. A few months ago, many of you will remember our colleagues and friends both in California and in Australia were suffering from wildfires, which are another real threat. So this is a systemic threat to our cultural institutions, and it deeply affects our strategy. So my recommendations are around thinking about the environment as a strategic issue for your institution that all institutions have to face. So my first recommendation in terms of being adaptive is taking a public stance on that and publishing a carbon negative plan on your website. There are other leading corporations doing that, and your institution needs to be accountable to the public about what you're going to be doing in that issue. Replace as much as you can the non-reusable materials, especially in food and beverage and merchandise, with things that can be cleaned or reused or reduced packaging. And a good example of a company that does this now, which has an Experian in New York City, is the National Geographic Encounter, which focuses on an ocean life program. So as part of their mission, they're communicating to their customers, they've reduced single-use plastics in that presentation in the store. And then of course, there's so much transactional waste in our facilities, whether it's the printed brochures, the ticketing, the receipts, the stickers that end up on the floor and on the street. It's not efficient. It's not going to help you understand your strategy better, but it's also bad for the environment. And as much as possible, again, using those digital first solutions for customer engagement. Most museums, in the case of publications, as I have here, still don't publish their basic exhibition catalogs or collections catalogs as electronic publications. Even if I would like to buy one, I don't even have the option to do so. Being contextually sensitive, we want to have a pro-social approach to the environment. So many of our institutions are actually situated in parks or urban landscapes or natural resources, and we can do so much more to partner with these local community groups and city services to have a better shared relationship and responsibility for that and working together. We can also incorporate discussions about the environment and climate change into our public programming, into our collections, presentations, and exhibitions. And especially in the education area, as we're seeing more and more states in the United States, especially focusing on STEM and STEAM curriculum in our Common Core, which is our shared curriculum across the country, needing and having environmental or climate change modules within those requirements for education. So making sure we hit those targets, especially in the education space, and delivering those things electronically. So if you have a really great STEM brochure for teachers, don't print it out and hand it to them. Make sure it's available to them electronically. And OER as much as possible. It's a bit short there for space, but OER is open educational resource if you're unfamiliar with the term. And that goes back to open access as well. So if you're going to produce a curriculum packet or a teacher guide, make sure that if you can produce it with open licensing as possible, that enables teachers and students to remix and share that material with other people. And we need that work in the STEM and Commons Core space happening from our institutions because we need more information as to what the public can do to be informed about climate change. And then thinking about how we're going to improve that in our communication. So I would recommend having a public dashboard that shares your resources there, having a regular reporting out from your blogs, from your public communications, what you are doing as an institution. You might even consider hiring or contracting with a chief environmental commitment officer or a chief sustainability officer as someone in your executive team. The importance of this, I think, couldn't be more clear to us, especially at this moment, but over the last year or so, and as someone who's lived in New York through 2 hurricanes, it's becoming even more clear. Redesigning our production processes. There's so many exhibition making activities or office activities that produce a great deal of waste. And this is a budgetary efficiency as well, and also our operational efficiency. So really thinking about the logistics of that in our strategy. And then going deeper, richer, and longer in our content production and distribution. So I see many museums racing with their curatorial programs, their educational programs to change the curriculum or change the exhibition in these very aggressive 3 to 6 month time cycles. And the question that I often ask of them in this process is, who is this for? Is it for the curatorial aspiration? Is it for the educational aspiration? Our customers actually probably need more time to spend with our collections and our content. And we don't have to force ourselves to in these production processes on the physical installation side if we can go longer and deeper, especially in the digital space. And now I want to move us to optimizing our efficiency and thinking about new growth and the key takeaways in this space. Your organization needs to move beyond the persistently weak behaviors of crisis management and triage towards resilience. We want you to be a resilient organization and stop being behind the commercial sector in the strategy and the running of your cultural business. It's a cultural business that's supporting a mission. And it's essential to invest the time, the money, the personnel now to optimize for this new growth. And for me, that new growth, the key areas of new growth are measurable engagement and earned revenue. So making sure that we're having our analytics and our reporting, that we're accounting for everything we do, and then we're growing that earned revenue capacity. And we really can't afford to wait. And especially in the context of the growth, thinking about it, the risks that are happening right now with philanthropy and contributed revenue, it's a very uncertain time in that regard. So the more you can do to take care of your own future and manage your own destiny with earned revenue, that's the way to go. And now I just want to very briefly give you some overview around the types of services that BPOC provides in terms of our strategy advisements. And these are very high level and just meant to show you some of the tools and frameworks that we use when we go through this process with our clients. So a few quick slides just to give you a frame of reference. So our strategy engagement process goes through this framework of visioning and goals, discovery and capacity building, engagement, infrastructure, and transition. So this is the sort of timeline and framework that we use when we help an organization go through this process. And when we get to the vision and goals, these are the areas that we work on here and our stages of vision. that first quadrant I showed you before. And when we think about our GLAM strategy stakeholders, you'll see that we put customers at the top. So maybe other organizations tend to think about the CEO or the board or the director first. We think about the customers first. And then, of course, we scale out to the rest of the project team. And one of the great tools that Nick has shared with me is our capability maturity models and how we want to help an organization grow from its initial stages through towards optimization. And so many of you may recognize maybe where your institution is in its current stage of maturity. Hopefully you're more toward the manage and optimizing, but maybe you're stuck in defined and repeatable. And we all know the dangers and the risks that come with that initial phase and sometimes being stuck there for far too long. And this is the second part of the model, which looks at how we move people, processes, our measurements, and our technology from that initial stage to that more optimized stage. So these are just some simple frameworks that these are all going to be available in the slides, and you can use them for free as you wish to in your organizations. So this is the overview, and here's me again in my details, and the recording and the slides will be available for this group and others, so we'll let you know when they can be shared. And one of the things I'm happy to share with you today is that this slide deck will be made available with a Creative Commons attribution license, and that's also a really important part of the process that I want to share with you as much as possible, using those Creative Commons licenses and open access content so that others can benefit from what you know and what you have learned. So thank you very much, Tricia and Douglas, for your invitation, and I will be happy to answer any questions either in the chat or on the voice.
Yes, thanks so much, Neal. Very thorough presentation, and again, really good timing always for museums to be thinking this way, but especially now. Opening it up to the group, does anyone have any questions for Neal?
It's Douglas. I'll break the silence. Good job, Neal. You and I have known each other for a long time, and I think we've had some interesting discussions about whether museums have audiences or customers and whether museums are businesses or not. When you're dealing with some of those clients who might be resistant to different kinds of language, what kinds of ways do you use to convince folks that 501c3 is a tax position and not a business plan?
That's right, Douglas. That's a great question. So when we tend to work with specific clients, we bring in specific examples related to our project with them. So Nick and I have done some projects with institutions in the last year, focusing more in those retail spaces and also merchandising. And so we are actually looking and doing we do user testing. We show people examples of how those applications work and have success for them. And again, as I showed in the slides, we focus on serving the mission of the institution. We want those missions to be successful and sustainable. So we see the business languages and techniques as a way to make those institutions sustainable and resilient, and where it makes sense to support the program.
This is Tricia. I'll hop in with a question too. I'm curious, Neal, how often are you going through a process like this with organizations, or do you recommend organizations go through this process? I think particularly right now, your deck speaks a lot about resilience versus triage and making sure museums are thinking long term right now, but they don't set up a plan that's 5-10 years long into the future where you can't react to the unknown. So how do you recommend museum or institutions balance sort of how often they should be going through this process and how to make it adaptable and responsive?
Thank you, Tricia. That's a great question. So that's where I've brought in the ideas of discipline and determination and diligence, but also being balanced with the dynamic sustainability platform. So it's both of those types of attitudes working together. So museums have typically worked through a 5 to 10 year strategic plan process, which is very, very slow. And I think we live in a world now where we understand, well, that's just not cutting it anymore. And so by front loading our metrics and our reporting and our systems, we can create those dynamic models so that the strategic plan is a living, breathing thing that changes with our circumstances all the time. We do this work with various institutions who have asked for it in the past, but we'd be happy to work with more people as the demand arises. But having the strategy, just like having a good technology plan, is just it's such a core business function today. It's something that no organization can do without.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? I'm seeing some love in the comments, but
Well, if anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to email me or contact me or contact Douglas and Tricia, and they can get a hold of me. Be love to help you and guide you in the process.
sounds great. Yeah, we'll post sort of a follow-up in Basecamp if anyone has any additional questions, and we're more than happy to keep the conversation going. And a huge thank you again to Neal for this very detailed and shareable presentation.
And I just want to again thank you both for inviting me, and especially thank our colleagues and clients who have joined as well today. So thank you for your support.
Great, thank you. Thanks all.